Welcome. Welcome to the Elokus podcast. And this is class number 8 in the discourse Naso, Rosh, which is the fourth discourse in the great book B'Shasha Hekdimu. We're holding now chapter 13. This is going to be the first class in chapter 13. We concluded chapter 12 in yesterday's class. And today's a special class because today is the birthday of the author, Shalom Dave Ber, known as the Rebbe Rashab. His birthday is Chaf Cheshvan, the 20th day of Cheshvan. 20 is the gematria, the numeric value of the word Keser, crown. 20 indicates the level of the crown, the highest crown of Torah. And the Rebbe Rashab was actually born in the year Tafresh Chaf Aleph, which is 5621. Which is 1862. That's what I think, 1862. I'm sorry, 1861. Actually, it would have been 1860. Chaf Aleph, yeah, because it's before the secular year changed. So he was born in 1860, but in the Hebrew calendar, 562. 5621, which, if you spell it and rearrange the letters, you get the word Kisra, which is Aramaic for crown. Keser is crown, Kisra, with an aleph at the end, is Aramaic for crown. So he was born on the 20th day, the crown of the crown, and he brings down the crown of the Torah. So it's a big, big merit to be learning his holy Torah on his birthday. Now, so let's see how old the Rebbe Rashab is, how many years this would be. If he was born 1860, 1960 would be 100 years. And then 2020 would be 160, would be another 60. And so 165 years since the birth of the Rebbe Rashab, this holy birthday. Okay, so ready, here we go. Just concluding thought, because we're going to do the Kitzer. We have to first do the Kitzer, the culmination of the previous chapter. The last point we learned in the last perek was that he was proving from the idea that the lights also can't be purely, in the full sense of the word, infinite, because the vessels would not be able to hold them. And so you have to say that there is some kind of a geder already. There's some kind of a definitions in the light which allow them to be captured in containers and in vessels. The vessels definitely have limitation. And then you would have a question, how can infinity be expressed and revealed in limited vessels? So we have to say that the infinity is not absolute infinity. That's the point. There's no question, as we're going to see it also in the next chapter, that he's not claiming that there is design in the energy. The energy, obviously, relative to the vessels, there is no design. The energy is pure, simple, with utter simplicity. But that's only relative to the vessels. But to the true sense of pure, undefined light that doesn't have any, even the subtlest leanings and possible definitions, potential definitions, that is what he is negating. He's saying you have to say that this light is already in the realm of limitation, although it itself is not yet limited, but it's in the realm of limitation. And that's why limited vessels are able to connect to it. Now, just to, I was thinking as the class ended yesterday, and I rushed to conclude the chapter, and I had some lingering thoughts, like basically the class was continuing in my head even after I finished giving it. So we had earlier learned he was doing he said you can't asked the question, remember, how can the letters of the Rishimu, which were the first levels of vessels, the source of the vessels, as they are still in the Or Ein Sof, and so they're also already a limitation. And yet, the infinite, pure, truly, essentially infinite light was radiating in them and expressing itself in them before the Tzimtzum. So you see that already a defined entity can hold an infinite light. So he said, he gave two arguments why you can't compare that. And I'm focusing on the second argument. The second argument was that before the Tzimtzum, when the infinite light was shining, true infinite light was shining, these lights, the Rishimu, the power of limitation, that's what the Rishimu is, the power of self-limitation that God had, was an utter shutdown. It was completely non-operative. And it was as if it doesn't exist. And he said, similar to the fact that after the tzimtzum, once the contraction, the great tzimtzum happens, the tzimtzum arishon, the first contraction happened, it completely changed the equation, the opposite. It made that the infinite light is relegated into a hidden state, into a non-expressed state, as if it doesn't exist. And only the limiting elements, the power of limitation, which sets boundaries and definitions to all of existence, muscles its way and overpowers this infinite light to the point that it shuts it down. The infinite is as if it's shut down completely, and the proof to that is that the infinite light is present everywhere, but it's not in any way interfering. It's not jamming us. It's not interfering with us. It's not distracting us. We don't get lost in infinity and lose our boundaries and lose our bearings, suddenly out of nowhere because we suddenly dissolved in the infinite light. That doesn't happen to us. Kind of the limitations are very fixed, rigid, and strong. And that's because the Tzimtzum Arishon is so powerful, it holds the infinite light in complete shutdown. It completely nullifies it as if it doesn't exist. So similar to that, before the Tzimtzum, the opposite was. The infinite had dominance, and the powers of finitude, going all the way up to the Oisius Arishimu, were as if they're non-existent. And therefore, you can't ask the question, how can the two be together? Because they're not really together. It's like a seesaw. When one is up, the other is down. The other is down, the other is up. It's like two people who can't really have a conversation. It's just that when one is sleeping, the other one is operating. When the other is sleeping, the other is operating. That's not a marriage. It's like you say, oh, these two people, they're so different they can't get married. And then lo and behold, someone says, I'll show you. And he's a matchmaker, and he does a daring thing, and he brings the two together, he puts them under the chuppah, and he marries them. And you say, wow, you come back 10 years, and they're married. Yeah, and they're married. It could be one of the two. Either the husband shut the wife down, and she never gets to make a peep in her life. She's completely subservient to him. Or the opposite, or the woman shut the husband down. He can't get one word out of his mouth. It's always her way or the highway. She dominates the entire life. So they're living in harmony. They're not living in harmony. At that point, she exists and he doesn't. Or the opposite. He exists and she doesn't. The idea of a marriage over here is the unification of both of them together. And that's the chiddush. That's what we're saying over here regarding the vessels of Atzilus. That's how it differentiates. You can't tell me how the lights of the Rishimu were, how the letters of the Rishimu were existent in the infinite light. Yeah, because the letters of the Rishimu were a non-entity then. And after the Tzimtzum happened, then the infinite light is a non-entity, in as much as the worlds are concerned. It's a non-entity. The chiddush of what we are talking about is where both are active and both are working together, like where? Like in Atzilus. In Atzilus you have lights and you have vessels. Vessels are limitation. And lights are not limitation, they're energy. And they're kind of representing the infinite. And here's where you can question. If they're both active and they're both expressed and they're coming together to create together as a husband and a wife unified together. So if that's where he's making the argument. If they would be absolutely diametrically opposed because the vessels are limited and the lights are truly and absolutely infinite and undefined, then it couldn't happen. There couldn't be this union. So therefore, this was all part of the proof that there is some slight, benign, if you might call it, hardly noticeable already, tracings of limitations and definitions that there is in the light already. Although, when you compare them to the vessels, it's as if there is no limitations to it. But it definitely is not the original light that has absolutely no limitations. And this is all going back to the point because it's an Or Pnimi, and Or Pnimi is not the Or Pnimi, which means it's meant to go, it's from its, although we're talking about pure light and everything, but since it was meant to be delivered into vessels, from its very, very quintessential origins, it's coming out already with certain restraints. It's not pure emanation and revelation of the source, which would be the Or Makif. And those Or Makif lights actually cannot be contained in vessels because those are truly infinite, as the Maamor is going to elaborate on over the next long course of time. So let's do the Kitzer. This is the Kitzer, this is the summary, the end of chapter 13. However, also the lights of Atzilus and B'chinas Esespheres. We have to say that the lights of Atzilus are also have subtle inside of them. They're 10. They're different, and one that's different. Ukamoy, and the proof that we gave was, again, he's going back to classes that we had from class 1 through class 7. So we have to go back to what we learned a while ago. Ukamoy ba'atik, like in the level of Atik Yomin, where there are no vessels, va'akudim, or in the world of Akudim, where there is a vessel, but there's only one vessel. And yet, we say there are 10 sphirot in one vessel. Hold it. If the entire responsibility for the definitions and the characterizations would be only in the vessels, so in the level of Atik Yomin, remember we learned, how is there 10 spheros of Atik? So we have to say that even in the lights, that was the proof. Remember we learned it. We have to say that the 10 spheres are there already, albeit maybe not noticeable, but it's there. If you'll really, really, really look deeply into the lights with a super what we might call a super telescope, you'll be able to, not a telescope, microscope, you'd be able to notice that in the lights as well there is already the subtleties of design. And then another proof was, this was a big one, if they were truly limitless, how do they enclose themselves in the vessels, which are limited? And even though this that you're getting so excited and you say, how can I go into a vessel? The vessel is limited. Well, the vessel is not so limited. It's only a koach hagavul. Well, we learned, but it's still enough gavul that it's called gavul. It's called limitation. They do magbil. They do bring hagbala. Bibchinas chesed gvura, in a state of chesed and gevura, which means they do have a slant of chesed and a slant of gevura. Number one, even if we say, remember when we spoke, when he mentioned that there is a koach hagvul, just give a light a second. I hate when the phone rings. Okay, just give me a second. These are deep thoughts and a little distractions make, yeah. They even if they're not limited, but they still are magbal. The vessels still create. They have the character of kindness and the character of gevura. Even though, remember this, we learned this earlier. Even if it's not limiting in quantity, it's still limiting in quality. Remember, v'gam, and even in quantity, we learned. Remember, we learned that it also lessens the lights. The vessels lessen the lights, that even when the lights will go through, even if in Atzilus they'll flow with infinity, but outside of Atzilus they're limited. Now in the end, he said, now he goes back to the point that we spoke about earlier today. And you can't question that or object to that and say, well, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, was once revealed in the letters of the Rishimu, and those are limited letters, and how can they facilitate infinite light? Lifnei HaTzimtzum, before the tzimtzum, before the contraction. He says it's not a comparison. It's not a point number one, which I didn't review today, is that those letters over there, those are not considered limited letters. They're not letters at all. And they're just as these letters. Remember, he says, when they're still before the tzimtzum, they're just one and the same of the Ein Sof. Because the idea that they limit is not because it's a force of limitation, but rather because it's part of the limitlessness of the Ein Sof. So therefore, you can't really refer to them as limited vessels that you should be able to ask, how come these vessels don't snap? They don't snap because they're not really limited. That was point number one. V'gam be'emes, and also in truth. Another point is that whatever that power was, it wasn't even activated. And that's why, like the husband who can live happily with his wife, as long as he doesn't open his mouth for the rest of his life, of course, if he's shut down. So that's right. So that's the one party is not speaking, is shut down. Of course, there is a peaceful marriage, but that's not real peace. So you can't compare that, like we said today. It's before the tzimtzum, the finitude, the power of limitation was such a non-entity. In the same way that after the tzimtzum, now reality that we are living in, the Or Ein Sof, doesn't exist here at all. Meaning it exists, it's everywhere, but in as much as our entire range of life and experience is this Or Ein Sof is not in any way interfering with us. Because it's as if it's not. The same way before the tzimtzum, that was not. So you can't ask the question, how were they able to both coexist? The lights and the vessels, because it really wasn't a coexistence. It was one, not the other. But in Atzilus, where there is a coexistence of the lights and the vessels, both expressing, so they have to have some communication. If you have a couple that have nothing in common, and they have nothing they can connect on, and nothing they can agree on, because they're absolutely different, then there's no way that they can both be expressed in their marriage. You have to find common ground. You have to find certain things, certain interests, certain connecting points. They don't have to live their lives absolutely in everything, all their hobbies and interests together, but there has to be connecting points. There has to be some associations where they see eye to eye, where they're connecting, where they agree to each other, where their lives overlap each other, so that they can mingle with each other. Not mingle, they can interact and braid their life together as one. Okay. Now we start chapter 13. This is a very, very deep, abstract, it's going to be a lot of fun, the next chapter, but we can do it. We've done it till now, we'll do this as well. So Lavad Kol now he's going to bring another proof. The truth is, it's just very beautiful. Again, it's going to challenge our ability to think in the abstract. Lavad Kol now, and in addition to all the above mentioned, Lo Yitachin Loymar, we cannot say the Masha Or Nikra Or Chesed. He's going to give now another proof that we cannot attribute the characterization of Chesed Gevura only to the vessels. We have to recognize that in the light itself there is already nuances of Chesed and Gevura, or of all the sphirot of all the attributes. Again, Lo Yitachin Loymar, we cannot say the Masha Or Nikra Or Chesed, that the light is called the light of Chesed. That's only after it goes into the vessel. An example for that would be clean, clear water that has no color at all, and that when you put it into a glass, and it's a red glass, then when you're looking at the water is now appearing to be red. And when you look into when you put it into a green glass, the water looks green. Obviously, then what? The green and the red has nothing to do with the water. The water is the same clean, clear water, colorless water. It's only the glass that is adding the color to the water. And even when the water is in the glass, the water in essence didn't change. Only its appearance that it looks green and it looks red, right? So that would be the same of argument that we're saying that the oirais don't have any characterization at all. It's only the vessels that give the kindness, give the flavor of kindness, and the characterization of discipline, right? But you can't say that. Avo mitzadatzman. But on its own, if you were to make the argument that the lights are free completely from any sort, any whatsoever characterization, then you would say that mitzadatzman on its own, yachaliyas oira gevura. Then the very same water. Let's imagine now. Before we spoke about, you fill up 2 cups. One is a green glass, and one is a red glass. And now, so the water that went into the green glass is green, and the water that went into the red glass is red. But now let's imagine something else, even stronger, where you pour the water into the green grass and it's green, into the green glass and it's green. Now you take that very same water, pour it out of the green glass, you put it into the red glass, now the water is red. And that would be even a stronger illustration when you want to demonstrate to people that the color that you're seeing is not in the water. The water doesn't have any relationship, because that very same water that was first in the green glass is now red. Why? Because you moved it over. Hold on 1 second, Michelle. Because you moved it over, you transported the water from one glass to the other glass, and it changed completely. It's a sign that the water was never that color. Fine. So you would make the same argument and say that when you say that there is chesed coming from God, kindness coming from God, or discipline, judgment, or whatever it is coming from God, it has nothing to do with the divine energy flowing. It's only the vessels that impart those definitions. And therefore, you would say that very same energy that's now projecting kindness, hypothetically, you can take that energy and put it into the other vessel, and that very same energy will change its entire nature, and it will produce discipline. All right, that's if we say that the lights have no characterization. Literally, it means that the oil of Hashem that's in the keli of Chesed can be taken out of the keli of Chesed and put into the keli of Gevura. And if it's going to be in the vessel of Gevura, of strength, it's going to be might. It's not going to be kindness. Right? That would be the argument. But the Rebbe, and we're saying that again, he's emphasizing that's not the case. That when the light goes into Chesed, into the vessel of Chesed, there is it's a different light. It's the element of chesed that's in the light that's going into the chesed vessel. And it's the element of gevura that's in the light that's going into the gevura. But it's already in the light. That's what he's arguing. The imkain, if you're going to argue that the kalim don't have, that only the vessels have the character, but the lights don't have the character, the imkain, if that would be the case, what is the idea that is stated in Zohar? Parshas Lech Lecha, Daf Pei Zayin, Amud Aleph. Migdash Melech is a pirush on the Zohar. So in these places it says Sham B'Shem Arizal. It says over there in the name of the Arizal. The Zohar doesn't say the name of the Arizal because the Zohar is 1,500 years before the Ari. But in Migdash Melech it brings the concept from the Arizal. Echlifu dichtayo, that there is an interesting phenomenon that happens in the Sfirot, in which there is an exchange, and the lights of Chesed are projected into the vessels of Gevura, and the opposite happens, that the lights of Gevura are flowing, the energy of Gevura is flowing into the vessel of Chesed. It's an exchange. Usually it's the Oira Chesed that goes into Chesed. The light of Chesed goes into the vessel of Chesed. And the light of Gevura goes into the vessel of Gevura. However, it says, the Zohar speaks about that there is sometimes in the godly scheme of things that he exchanges the lights with the vessels. It's almost like you put your right foot into your left shoe, and you put your left foot into your right shoe. That's what happened. There's an exchange in the vessels. The chlifu d'chtayu oira chesed, the light of the chesed goes b'kli ha'gevura, goes into the vessel of gevura, and vice versa. That the light of gevura went in, the oir of gevura went into that. Now that whole thing doesn't only make sense if there is chesed in the light already and gevura in the light, in the oir, in the light, in the energy. But if you're going to make the argument that the lights are always the same, there is no difference in the lights. What do you mean the light of chesed went into gevura? If that light went into gevura, then it's gevura. If that light went into chesed, it went into chesed. What do you mean? There is an exchange. Nothing is exchanging. The light is always simple. The light is not chesed and not gevura. From the fact that the Arizal says and the Zohar says that there could be a situation where there is an exchange taking place, where the light of chesed goes into gevura and the light of gevura goes into chesed, is a sign that the lights themselves are characterized as chesed and as gevura, as kindness and as gevura. And that's the chidush, that's the novelty, that notwithstanding the fact that the light of chesed belongs in the vessel of chesed, from time to time, for whatever reason, the light of chesed makes its way into the vessel of gevura, and the light of gevura and the energy of gevura makes its way in the vessel of chesed. Makes sense because there is already that would then you can say so, and that's what his question is. You can't refer to it afachlifu. You can't refer to it as an exchange. It never had more connection to kindness than to gevura. The light is always what we call pariv. It's always simple. It's not this, it's not that. So what kind of statement is that? That the light of kindness went into the vessel of gevura. So therefore, you're forced to say that what? That there is already a colorization, albeit very subtle, in the lights itself. In the next place, he's going to start explaining what does this mean, this exchange? How does it work? And what is the subtlety of characterization that's in the lights versus the vessels that are really defined? And we're going to speak about that, Be'ezus Hashem, in the next class.